Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Still a bit of a scratchy voice, but it's manageable. This footage is actually from a few months ago. I had made and filmed this card and I never got a chance to edit everything. So I did that today and I'm using the Technique Tuesday Rock Family stamp set. I'd shown this in a haul video way back in the fall or something like that. And I just thought it was cute, so I wanted to make a birthday card with this. So what I'm doing is stamping the images, all the little rock people images from this set onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock with Versamark ink. And even in real life, you can barely see Versamark on Bristol Smooth. So after I would stamp an image or a couple of them, I was coating them with clear embossing powder. And I wasn't melting anything until I'd stamped my entire background, but putting the embossing powder on was helping me see where things were stamped. And then once I had that entire background stamped with all the little rock images and coated with the clear embossing powder, I melted everything with my heat tool, which then goes back to making it harder to see. Although in real life, it's a little easier to see because the light will kind of reflect off of the embossing powder, so I can see what I'm doing. But as you go along and start adding color, it gets a little bit easier. So after I had melted everything, I am coloring in all of these images with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers and a water brush. And in the beginning, I started with just one marker. I was, kind of experimenting to see what would work. And I think I have these in order. I'm going to have them listed on the screen, and I can't say 100% that this is exactly the order of colors I used. I just wrote them all down, and because it's been so long since I made this is why I usually like creating and filming all in one step, so that, editing, so I know exactly, what I did. But with this first one, after I added the color, and I think I was using the natural gray here, it was a little too light. You still couldn't really see much of the detail. There's all these little pebbly kind of looks around the edges and the little face and that. So then I went in with mid-gray, which is darker, and that really helped kind of deepen everything up and make the details and whatnot pop out a bit more. So once I had figured that out, for the other remaining images, I was doing kind of the same thing. I would just go in with the darker marker first, blend it out a bit with the lighter marker. That's one thing these markers are really good for, and I don't do it very often, is blending with the actual brush markers and then taking my water brush and really pulling that color out. So this doesn't hurt the brush markers, using a lighter color to blend the darker color, because you can just scribble it off on a scrap of paper and it's good to go. So I'm doing kind of similar little combos for each different style of rock, just to make things look a little bit different, but still kind of keeping to obviously natural grays and blue grays and whatnot. And for those other smaller ones, I was using green gray and light gray. And then for this lady rock, I was using more kind of blue grays and darker colors. And then I went in and added the little stripes on the rock. I did a bit of blue and whatnot. And then finally just going around and just kind of filling everything in. So obviously I've sped this up quite a bit. It was fairly simple coloring, just laying down the marker and then pulling it out with my water brush and just doing all of the same images at the same time to save me from having to wipe off my water brush, to clean it off between colors. So after I finished coloring in all of the images and the ones that had little, details in the eyes and the mouth, I would color those in. And then I went around with a really pale gray and just went around the outer perimeter of all these images and then just pulled that out and softened it with my water brush. So of course, I wasn't going to just leave it at that. I wanted to add a little bit of shimmer to these, but not go completely overboard, because this is a masculine card. I had actually made this for Chris for his birthday, and it was kind of an inside joke about the rocks and everything else. But most rocks have a little bit of shimmer to them. So I decided to add a little bit of that using some Perfect Pearls powder. And I would just pick a little bit up, and I was mixing it with my water brush just on an acrylic block and adding it into the color that I had already applied. So I was using pewter Perfect Pearls and then Perfect Pearl, the white. And then I actually mixed a little bit of the Perfect Pearl with Heirloom Gold. and added that to the slightly kind of brown color of rocks. And again, I was subtle with this. I didn't, you know, go all out massive amounts of sparkle. I just wanted that little bit of shimmer, because when the light catches it, it just kind of gives it that little extra something. And I liked it. So after I had added all of the little bit of shimmer with those perfect pearls, I made sure everything was completely dry. And then of course I had to add some splatter. So for the first bit of splatter, I used Distress ink in Black Soot and watered that down a little bit, and then felt like I'd watered it down a little bit too much. So I added more of the Black Soot, and I'm just using a paintbrush here. So added a little bit of water, have my Black Soot ink on the acrylic block, and then adding just a really fine splatter. It doesn't show up much in the video, but in the pictures at the end and on my blog, you can see the splatter. I just wanted a very fine splatter, not big blobs or anything like that. I just kind of wanted that texture. So I added that, let that dry, and then of course I had to add more splatter with my Copic Opaque White. And I made sure to wash my brush out before I put it into the Copic Opaque White, because otherwise you would end up with gray. So made sure my brush was really, really clean before I dipped in, added a little bit of that to my acrylic block, added a little bit of water to thin it out, and then just added some more splatter. Again, keeping it pretty subtle. So same thing, after I add the splatter, I'm going to set this aside, let it dry, and work on the rest of the card. So I have some dark gray cardstock here, and it was just a scrap, but it was big enough. I made sure it was big enough that I'd be able to die cut it once I'm done. And I just used my anti-static powder tool on it. And then I have this MFT framework background, and I've got the background facing face up. I'm inking it up with my Versamark ink, and then I'm going to bring the cardstock to the background and then just press on it with my fingers. I didn't worry about the middle. I just wanted the outside edges to be stamped, because that's the only thing you're going to see. You're not going to see the middle, so it's irrelevant. So once I had the image stamped, I'm going to coat all of that with that same clear embossing powder. And this is Nouveau's clear embossing powder. So I just kept turning it and coating the stamped image with the clear embossing powder. And then I'm going to melt all of this again with my heat tool. And the clear on the cardstock, it just gives it that dark gloss, but same color as the cardstock, which I just love. And I always love watching embossing powder melt, especially when you're doing an entire background like this. It's almost like magic. So made sure to completely melt this with my heat tool. So you just got to make sure it's like nice and glossy and doesn't look matte or gritty or anything like that, because this is a glossy embossing powder. And then once it was completely melted and had a minute to cool off, I'm using one of the Simon Says Stamp stitched rectangle wafer dies to die cut that. So I've got that die cut. I had trimmed down, I'd used one of the dies, I think, on the rock piece as well to trim it down just a little bit. And then my card base is some lighter gray cardstock. And again, I use my anti-static powder tool on that, as well as on a scrap of black cardstock. And I'm stamping sentiments from both the Rock Family stamp set, and on the inside I'm stamping a sentiment from the Technique Tuesday Say What stamp set. It has some cute, like, kind of quirky little sayings and whatnot. So I stamped those on the inside of the card and on this black cardstock, and I'm coating these with Hero Art's white embossing powder. So doing this all at once just to save me the time. And then I'm going to melt both of these with my heat tool, which just makes, again, it go faster because I've got the heat tool good and hot. It literally took seconds to melt the sentiment on the black cardstock. So once I've got everything melted and my embossing powder back in its container and the lid back on it, I'm going to remove that anti-static powder with my little Swiffer cloth here. And then I decided to stamp just one of the little rocks from that Rock Family stamp set with the Versamark ink just on the inside of the card just to finish it off. So stamp that, and then I'm going to start trimming things down and assembling my cards. So I'm going to use my Tim Holtz trimmer here to trim down this scrap of black cardstock for my sentiment. Just trimmed it in a strip, and then I just placed it on an angle and kind of eyeballed it, and then held that in place and then trimmed that down again with the trimmer, so it just had a bit of an angled edge. And then I'm going to adhere that to my card front with a little piece of foam tape. And then I decided to adhere the Rock Family layer to the embossed background with my Xyron Mega Runner. Just adhere that nice and flat. So I'm going to adhere my sentiment first, and I'm going to flip this over and apply adhesive all around the edges of the watercolor piece I'd done, which didn't warp too bad because I didn't add a ton of water, but then also running it through my die cut machine helped flatten it out a bit. So I'm going to adhere that flat, and then I decided to adhere this whole layer to the card base with some foam tape just to pop it up. And my card base is A2 sized, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then as a final embellishment, I have several different Studio Caudia gems here. I've got some iridescent hearts and some silver foil crystals and some of the black crystals from Studio Caudia that I just love. So the black and the silver went really well. The hearts, I had to add them because they were cute, and I think it worked. So I just kind of arranged them, kind of scattered them all over the card here. And then once I was kind of happy with everything, I'm just picking them up with my little Marvy jewel picker and using little dabs of the multi-medium matte adhesive from Ranger. So just squeezing a little dab of that and then pressing the different crystals into that, and then that's going to adhere them perfectly to this card. So some of them I'm adhering on the emboss layer, some I'm adhering to the actual card base, and I would just kind of tuck it underneath a little bit so it's just kind of peeking out. And then the rest I'm just adhering right over the stamping and watercoloring I'd done. So just to kind of tie everything together, and it's, you know, gives it a little bit of shimmer without going completely over the top. And that finished off the card. So I will have links below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.